Hello knitters, Barbara Benson here. I'm an independent knitwear designer who also likes to make videos here on my YouTube channel, Watch Barbara Knit. Make sure to check in the description notes below the video where you will find links to all of my online shenanigans, including how to get my patterns to knit up for yourself, how to join the Watch Barbara Knit Facebook group, how to support me on Patreon, and where to get Watch Barbara Knit merchandise. And as always, I love it when y'all talk to me in the comments. Comments are a really great way for me to have dialogue and find out like if you enjoyed the video or if you made you have more questions, or to simply maybe point me in the direction of a new video I could make, which is what this particular video is about. On one of my recent videos, I had this comment right here from Suzanne, and she said nice things. I hope that I am fun to hang with. I do not always talk about knitting as much as I do, but if that's what you want to do, I am totally up for it. And she asked, would you ever consider discussing grams versus yardage versus yarn weight? I've been knitting a long time, and the significance of the grams things remains a total mystery. Now, I responded to Suzanne in the comments and said I have made videos, but I didn't know that I had made one like specifically. Like I didn't have here's a link to a video that answers your exact question. I know I've talked about it in other videos, but I couldn't search through my videos and find like one specific video that I could point them to say, here, this answers your question without any other extraneous information. Because what I do know is that I've talked about this in the context of other things like understanding yarn weights and understanding yarn substitution and all kinds of things like that, reading yarn labels. But I wanted to make a video that precisely answered this question, and it doesn't hurt to revisit these sorts of things because it's possible that I've talked about it before and you've even heard me talk about it before, but it just didn't make the light bulb go on. So hopefully I can answer the question concisely and then have this video to just send somebody a link the next time they ask this questions. Now, what I believe this individual is asking about is when you purchase yarn, it's in a specific size skein or hank or whatever. And first we have to cover a little bit of terminology. So you have yarn weight, which is referring to the thick or thinness of the yarn. And then you have the weight of the ball, as in the physical amount of yarn measured by like weighing it. And you know, it's confusing, and I even have a video on this, on confusing words in knitting that mean the same thing, like gauge and gauge and knit, but weight. So yarn weight means the thickness of the yarn itself, but your skein or your hank also has its weight, as in how much that ball of yarn weighs. One thing to be aware is that most yarn comes at one of two physical weights. Either it comes in 100-gram skeins or 50-gram skeins. Those are the most common, and I'm going to get, so 100 grams translates to 3.53 ounces, which I believe the reason why we use metric for this is the 0.53 seems ridiculous. So then 50 grams is 1.76 ounces. So 100 grams or 50 grams are the most common. Now, you've also seen certain independent dyers starting to get into specifically with fingering weight yarns. Their fingering weight skeins are more in the 113 or 114 gram range. I'm not real certain wise. When you are dealing with luxury yarns like cashmere or mohair, or when you get into lace weight yarns, which is very, very, very fine yarns, you will frequently find them in 25-gram skeins. The luxury yarns are in the 25-gram skeins frequently, just to make the sticker shock of that yarn a little less excessive. Because when you get into cashmere and kiviot and vicuña and these very, very expensive yarns, if you have like 100 grams of it, it could be, I mean, really, really, really expensive. Cashmere at 25-gram skeins can be in the $25-$30 a ball. So if it's that much for a 25-gram skein, then a 100-gram skein is gonna be over $100, and that is sort of a sticker shock kind of situation. So luxury yarns and very, very fine yarns, because simply you don't need that much yardage, can be found in 25-gram skeins. And I'm telling you all of this because when you're trying to compare yarns to each other, you need to compare apples to apples. If you're trying to figure out if a yarn is substitutable or what you have to make sure that you're comparing a 100-gram skein to a 100-gram skein, not a 100-gram skein to a 50-gram skein, because we have people who come into the store and the only information they've brought us from their pattern is that their pattern says they need 5 balls of yarn. 5 balls of what yarn? Just because it's 5 balls of that yarn, if that was 5 balls and they were 100 grams piece, that means you need 500 grams of yarn. If it was 5 balls and it was 50 grams a piece, you need 250 grams of yarn. So you can't just go by balls, really, ever. You have to, unless you're buying the exact yarn they're calling for. I mean, there is, never say never. Unless you're buying the exact yarn they're calling for, you really need to know the yardage per gram ratio that you have. And this gets us to another piece of terminology. The amount of yardage or meterage per gram is called grist, Grist, and it is precisely that. It's how much yardage or meterage do you have in that 100 gram, 50 gram skein. And what I'd like you to imagine with me is that we have a 100 gram puffy thing of wool. It's going to be like this big, right? If we take that 100 gram thing, puffy, beautiful wool, and pull it out, which is what spinning is, and we pull it out until we have about 100 yards, our yarn's going to be like, it's going to be chunky. It's going to be a fatter yarn. If you take that same 100 grams and pull it out to 400 yards, it's going to be much, much, much skinnier because it's the same amount of fiber. You're just pulling it out more and getting more yardage, so it has to be skinnier because unfortunately yarn does not defy the laws of physics. I mean, would I like never-ending yarn? 100%, but that's unfortunately not the way it works. So the reason why you're given this however many yards or meters per gram is that tells you what weight your yarn is. And by weight, I mean the thickness, yarn weight. The typical terminology that is used if you're going into like a local yarn store is going to be lace weight, fingering weight, sport weight, DK weight, worsted weight, Aran weight, bulky, super bulky, jumbo. All of those words are yarn weight words. Now, I said those actually in a specific order because what that is in the thickness order. So your thinnest yarns are going to be lace weight, and even under lace weight is a cobweb weight, but you very rarely run into those. But lace weight is the thinnest yarn. The next one up is fingering weight, and fingering and sock weight are the same weight. I have a whole video I'll link to about what the difference between fingering and sock yarns are, but fingering weight yarn is just heavier than lace weight yarn, and you can say that all sock yarns are fingering weight, but not all fingering weight yarns are good for making socks. So you've got lace, skinniest, fingering / sock, next one up. Then just above that is sport weight. Just above sport weight is DK, which stands for double knitting, and another word for sock / fingering is knitting weight. So you can say sock / fingering / knitting weight. If you double knitting weight, you get DK. That's why it says double knitting. Just above DK weight is worsted weight. Above worsted weight is Aran weight, then bulky, then super bulky, then jumbo, enormous. I mean, they've kind of gone off the deep end with the heavier side of things. Now, all of this terminology, how does it relate to yardage? And I'm afraid I'm going to have to talk in yardage because I don't know meterage in my brain, but what I will do is I'm going to talk, and when I'm editing it, I will do the math and put down here what that translates to in meters for those of you who use metric measurements. So if you have, and we're talking about in 100 grams, okay? Our baseline for a skein size is 100 grams of fiber, okay? And there's complications to this when you get into different fibers, because different fibers and different yarn structures. And so this is all just general guidelines. But right now, 100 grams wool, what we're talking about. If you have over 500 yards, 500 plus yards in 100 grams, you're talking about lace weight yarn. That's going to be very fine yarn. And when I talk about this, it's like plus or minus like 5 to 10%. So if you have like 490, that's still really in the lace weight category. 480, you're getting down 480, 470, you're still lace-ish weight, but getting into what's considered light fingering, okay? Fingering weight, you're looking at anywhere from like 395 yards up to generally around 440, 450 yards. So that window is where you're looking at fingering weight yarns, again, per 100 grams. And then there's that kind of wiggle room area between 450 and 490 that you're sort of in lace weight and sort of in fingering weight. So it's what you get into there is really nuances on yarn structure. Is it going to bloom a lot? And where you need to go by the guidelines of, is the yarn company labeling it a lace weight or a fingering weight? So, but pretty standard for fingering or sock yarns is 400 yards is 100 grams. That's really fairly standard. Now, once we get down to 390, going down almost to like 300 yards, so 300 to 390 per 100 grams, we're getting into sport weight yarns, with like 335 to 360-ish being fairly middle of the road for sport weight. Then once we drop under 300 down to about 225, 230-ish is DK weight yarn. Again, per 100 grams. Even like nudging down into like 220 yards, you can still, that's a light worsted or a heavy-ish DK. So once you get down like 220 down to like maybe 190 or 180, 185 to like 220. That's worsted weight yarn. And you can see as we are getting heavier, the windows are getting narrower because there's a lot more wiggle room at the skinny end of how much it weighs than at the chunky end because we're running out of wool to work with. When you get under like 180 yards, so like 120 to 180 is Aran weight. It's too heavy to be worsted weight and not really substitutable, but because it's going to be thick. But again, as I said, the windows are getting narrower. Then if you have less than 120, like 100 to 120, you're getting into the bulky range. If you have less than 100 yards in 100 grams, you're getting into the super bulky range, and you can get even into like super bulky jumbo where you're only looking at like 70 yards, 60 yards in 100 grams. So it's a very small amount of yardage because the yarn is just gigantic. So that is a whole lot of numbers, I know, but the ranges of where your grist, your yards per gram weight, place things on this sliding scale. So what you want to do if you're trying to compare yarns is first check, is it a 100 gram skein or a 50 gram skein or a irregular weight skein, because we do have Blue Sky Fibers wool stock actually comes in 150 gram skeins, and Yowza comes in a much heavier skein. You can find heavier skeins. You can find, as I said, 25 gram skeins. And now that we have mini skeins, you just got to read the label because there's all different kinds. So if you have, and you're trying to compare two yarns, and one of them is 400 yards in 100 grams, and the other one is 200 yards in 50 grams, well, you just multiply it by 2, right? So if you have a 50 gram skein times 2, that takes you up to 100 grams. You multiply the yardage times 2, that takes you up to 400 yards. So those two are equal. But if it's only like 150 yards in a 50 gram skein multiplied by 2, that's only 300 yards. So you're looking at something more in the light decay to heavier sport range. So make sure that you're comparing like to like. And again, fiber content can come into this. There are certain fibers that are significantly heavier, like cotton weighs more and silk weighs more than a wool does. And the spin, the yarn structure, also can weigh into this because there's all kinds of interesting yarn structures out there. They have the cage plying where it's all puffy and the yarn is really like 50% air, so they can get more poof with less fiber, so you can get more yardage. But again, read your label, look for the grams, look for the yardage, and look for what the yarn company says it is. And that you can look at like the needle they recommend and the stitches per inch they recommend will also give you an idea of what yarn weight that company considers it to be. And I have a cheat sheet on that, which I will link to in the description notes as far as how yarn weight relates to stitches per inch, and that's a completely different subject. And as I said, I was trying to keep this one kind of on focus to explain and answer the question, what does grams have to do with any of this? And what it is it is the grist. It is telling you how thick that yarn is and how many yards per grams is understanding that is going to help you more effectively substitute yarns and have more success when you are knitting or crocheting or weaving, whatever you're doing, substituting like for like. Understanding this ratio can help you not run out of yarn, which I think is a goal of a lot of ours. So, Suzanne, I hope that wasn't too much. I hope I didn't just overkill, but there we go. That is what does this gram thing have to do with anything in knitting. If you like this video, please give it the thumbs up, click that like button. And if you would like to be notified whenever I upload a new video, please subscribe to my channel and select notifications. Thank you so much. Unfortunately,